We're back, episode 17. Today we're trying to figure out what would be a great topic, and in our all-hands meeting with our staff, we were unpacking this idea of wisdom and knowledge, and it kind of opened a can of worms, and we weren't able to wrap it up there, so we thought we would just try to unpack some of that here. It started with just the idea that we talk about a lot. We want to be good stewards of what Father has entrusted to us, and to do that, we know that we need wisdom. And we don't want to be foolish with the things that he's given us. And so the Bible talks a lot about wisdom, and there's this recurring theme, especially in Proverbs, that we see where the word tells us that the fear of Yahweh is wisdom, or the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And we know from James that we can ask for wisdom, and he'll give it to us. And a quick reference for that, just so we know we have the authority that the creator and author of wisdom will impart it to his children. In James 1:5 it says, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of Elohim, and who gives all generously and without reproach, and it shall be given to him. So we know that we can approach him and ask for his wisdom with confidence, and he'll give it to us. And there's just this continual theme in Proverbs where it says, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of Yahweh, and with that you'll get wisdom and knowledge. And there's these two words it keeps using, as wisdom and knowledge. And in a study, just one day I noticed that in Proverbs 14:33 it says, wisdom rests in the heart of him who has understanding. And that got me asking the question, what is understanding then? Like, what does that mean? Because if that's the core of it, what's understanding? And I was reminded of another verse just a few chapters back in Proverbs 9. Proverbs 9:10, it says, the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the set-apart one is understanding, or knowledge of the Spirit is understanding. And then I connected it because now we have a definition of what understanding is. It tells us knowledge of the set-apart one is understanding. So then I compare these two verses together, and we get, if I were to reread this as it reads now, it says, wisdom rests in the heart of him who has understanding. And so if I were to pair those together, it would say, wisdom rests in him who knows the set-apart Spirit, or who knows the Spirit. And so then it's this foundation that the relationship with the Spirit is where understanding comes from. And when we have understanding, wisdom will rest in our heart. And so there's like this core root to this theme that we're seeing of the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of wisdom, and the fear of Yahweh is an entire a whole thing we could talk about as well. But it was this really kind of big breakthrough for me, and we were talking about it as a staff, and I think we're just gonna kind of unpack from there.
Yeah, and that triggered some neat thoughts for me, because I had been preparing a message, and actually it's a work in progress even, but I'd shared a message recently that focused on knowing the Creator, what that means to know God, to know Yahweh. And as I started to look at that topic, all those different themes kept resurfacing. The theme of fearing Yahweh, knowing Him, wisdom, understanding, they're all interconnected in a really neat way. And how I started this out, I thought I had done this to you guys, but I guess I haven't. But how I started this message out the first time I gave it was to look at this little illustration, and we're going to get a fresh reaction here. And this goes to what we think we know, right? Okay, so if we look at this is kind of crude. It's just I had it folded up in my Bible, but do a live survey here. Which square do you think is darker?
Oh man, I don't know where this is going, but yeah, A looks significantly darker than B. To me, that's my vote.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's what it looks like.
So check this out.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that crazy?
Same, huh? Just shadows.
And when I first saw this, the biggest thing that jumped out at me about this is, like, we can debate so many things in Scripture. We think we know this, we're convinced, about this, and I mean, why do we have so many denominations and everything else, right? Because we've come to Scripture and we've found a truth that we're convinced about, and now that's how we see it, right? We see, like, it seems black and white. But a lot of times, like, with just a little humility and truth, we might realize that both sides are right. There may be an element of truth to two seemingly contradictory positions. And so the biggest takeaway for me on this was, it's not about a pursuit of knowledge in the sense of intellectual knowledge, right? It's a pursuit of of a person. And it was really, I was watching, I was either Father of Lights or Furious Love, but they made a great, one of the interviewees on there made a great point. He said, truth, truth isn't a thing, truth is a person. And so in our pursuit of knowing our Creator, we're pursuing a relationship, not an academic experience. And so kind of where this started out for me was one of my favorite all-time verses in John 17. And we typically tend to over spiritualize things, and kind of in religion it becomes sort of cosmic. And you think about, for example, eternal life. Like, that seems like a really cosmic concept. How do we have eternal life? What do we have to do? Is there a formula? What does that look like? But John 17 breaks it down super simple. And Messiah said to his followers in verse, let's see, in verse 3, he gives us the definition, like point blank. And he says, "And this is everlasting life, that they should know you, the only true God, and Yahushua Messiah, whom you have sent." And so, like, you think about all the emphasis on, get saved and all this stuff, but it really boils down to knowing the Creator and His Son. And those are also the keys to connect back to how this started out with our devotion. Those are the keys to wisdom, is knowing the Spirit, having understanding of the Spirit. So there's a ton there. I don't know exactly where we're gonna which thread to chase for now, but
Yeah.
That's good.
The whole understanding thing, it really is just hitting me hard, that to get the wisdom and the understanding comes from this personal relationship with the Spirit. And we know that we're new creations when the Spirit enters us, and but to have that comes with knowing them. It's interesting. I had a really strong thought, and then your last sentence kind of threw me off. I'm trying to reel it back in here. What does the verse in John 17 say? Can you just reread that?
So this is everlasting life, that they should know you, the only true, and again back to that concept of truth, the only true Elohim, or true God, and Yahushua Messiah, whom you have sent.
Mm-hmm.
And to bring it back to, like, even if we go to Matthew 7, it reminded me of when Messiah told those as a warning. He said, "Be careful, because you can do all these things in my name, but at the end of it, to some of those people I will say, get away from me, I never knew you." There was no relationship. Even though you used my name, you did signs and wonders, you claimed to follow me, but I didn't know you, and you didn't do what I wanted. You were lawless. But before that, about the narrow path, like, something jumped out at me, because in that same chapter, in that context, is also enter through the narrow gate, because the gate is wide and the way is broad that leads to destruction. This is verse 13. Where was it? There was an understanding in there somewhere. I just lost it. Oh, because the gate is narrow and the way is hard pressed, which leads to life. Again, that idea of the path to life, and connecting forward to John 17, this is life.
Mm-hmm. I think what I was thinking about before was, you mentioned that it's not a pursuit of truth, it's a pursuit of someone. It's a pursuit of Messiah, and that's what leads to life. And that tied to me back to that opening definition where we're able to pair the two verses and understand what understanding is. It's knowledge of the Spirit, or knowing the Spirit. So personally knowing the Spirit will create understanding. It's not a study, it's not time at church or whatever, but it's this personal relationship. So the same thing, that this personal relationship with Yeshua is life. This personal relationship with the Spirit is where understanding resides. That'll be the foundation and the core of gaining understanding, which leads to wisdom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with these verses, then I like to pick apart each word. Like, so we know that it's everlasting life to know Yahweh, but what does that word to know mean?
Mm.
When you start to unpack that, like going back to the Hebrew, that word is yada, and it's literally used most commonly in the sense of physical intimacy between a man and a woman that produces an offspring. When it says, and Adam knew Havah, and she bore Cain, for example, and so there's that sense of knowing goes far beyond what we typically think of in our current mindset. I know that the weather is going to be rainy tomorrow is a very, very different type of knowing than the knowing that's biblical,
Mhm.
in the sense of the things that Father gave us to be concrete examples of illustrating his desire for intimate relationship with us.
Do you think that knowing is the same as abiding? Do those tie together? So to abide, he says, "Abide in me," and do you think that's the same thing as, because that definition feels very much the same thing as know. So you literally
Yeah.
inside, coming, um, you're inside of you're within Him. So
Hmm.
that's a different kind of experience than from afar,
Right.
internal knowledge or internal
Yeah.
experience.
I think there's a very strong connection there. The difference between knowing about a planet out there in outer space versus actually being on that planet or in that planet. Um,
Because I think, um, just so much stuff, where Father talks about abiding in me, or Messiah does, right? Abide in me, all you who are thirsty and weary. And in Psalms, David talks about, the one thing he desires. He says, I'm going to need my devotional. He's speaking from first person. He says, um, I desire to abide in you, that I may know and understand who you are and pursue the deepest parts of your heart. Um, and it's just, he's seeking this intimacy. And I don't know, it stood out to me when you started talking about know, because I didn't know that about Yada before. And when you were saying that, I just felt like, man, there feels like a really strong parallel here to abiding in, because that's physically, it's that super deep intimacy.
yeah, and that begs the question, like, for what purpose? Like, why does the Creator want to know us? What's the reason? Why would, number one, why did he create us? But number two, why would he even bother? I mean, we're so messed up, and think of all those kind of angles. But one of the things that jumped out at me, starting to look at it through that lens, was Genesis 18:19, which says, this is Yahweh talking about Abraham now, and he says, "For I have known him," again that same Hebrew word yada, "for I have known him because," or to the end that, "so that he may command his children and his household after him, that they may keep the way of Yahweh, to do righteousness and justice, so that Yahweh may bring upon Abraham that which he hath spoken of him," or promised to him.
Mm-hmm. I
So
love the
pretty
question why.
pretty powerful. Yeah, what's the question?
You asked the question, like, why all that,
Yeah.
why is it important to know him or to abide? Like, where is this stemming from? And it's so interesting when you put that term out there, or that question. It just reminds me of this, just the only example I have, which is here today, and it's the example of parents and their children. And I don't know if this is simplifying it too much, because I don't understand why he would want to know us for the times that I turn my back on him, and just that I'm just really a bad person, and not great to be in a relationship with. But I think about parents, and I think about a parent that has a child that, and the prodigal son, is a great example of it. But the parents I know, it's that desire to know your children. And I'm not a parent, so I'm sitting here speaking from an outside perspective of watching my friends and family, and how they parent their children. But I feel like one of the most devastating, heartbreaking things would be to have a child that distances themselves from the family or from their parents. And regardless of how bad that child or anything that they did, like, you guys as fathers, both of you guys are fathers, your heart would be breaking just to connect with your child. You wouldn't care. And when you connected with them, it wouldn't be like, I'm desiring to connect with you so you can do all these chores for me, or so you can do this work for me, or so you can give me money. It's just like, no, my heart is bleeding. I just want to be connected with you. I want to know you. I want to know what's going on in your life. I want to be connected. And so there's that that breaking, and I think about that when I see people that don't know God, or they don't they don't have an interest in knowing God, and they can't understand why. It's an analogy I use a lot of, like, and they're usually their parents. I say, imagine if you hadn't talked to your kid in 20 years. Like, would you want anything from them other than just to know them, just to be in their presence and just to have that relationship? And so the why to me is why parents want to connect with their children regardless of how bad their children get. That's the kind of a simple answer. That's I guess that's what I think.
Yeah. Well, and that raises the interesting thing. Typically, we think of spirituality in terms of us knowing God. I mean, even other religions, it's all about how they know Him. But biblically, we see that it's more important that He knows us. And you can kind of flip that on its head, right? Like, we can know a lot about Him. We can know a lot about whatever. But if there's not a two-way relationship, that's a completely different thing. And we see that with Abraham's example, Moses' example, a couple places in Matthew with Matthew 7, and then later on with the foolish virgins, with the 10 virgins and the 5 foolish ones, where he says, I did not know you, I do not know you. And so the criteria is not just do we know Him. The criteria is there a mutual relationship? Do we know Him, and does He know us?
Yeah, I think it's
well, that's interesting. Yeah, the whole "I never knew you." That's interesting because that like touches on that end of thing.
Last night, me and Megan were watching a podcast on a marriage series. I can't remember. I'd like to quote it if you remember. Is what you sent to us, Andrew. The marriage something site.
Oh, cool. Yeah, a whole bunch of.
Yeah, I wish I could remember the name of the URL. I might find it in a second. Anyways, he was talking about the importance of sharing your pain with the Father, sharing things that are in the darkness with the Father. And he just said one thing, and to me that just really rocked me. And this is where I'm going with this, is that He wants to know us, and part of that is us sharing with Him and getting really real. And it's easy for us to take hurts and wounds and everything and hide them. Everyone talks about it, but the thing that he said that blew my mind was he said that that when we keep things in darkness, we're handing those over to the Prince of Darkness. We know that Satan is the Prince of Darkness. He's the king of darkness. And so when we allow them to abide there, we're allowing him to torment and to manage that. But we also know that when we shed things and we bring them to the light, then it's to our Heavenly Father, who is the King of light. His kingdom is of light. And so so there's this great thing. He wants to know us, but so that we can pull our pains or hurts out of the kingdom of darkness and present them to the King of light. And the crazy thing is when we present them, He's going to heal those things. He's not going to. So when we have that relationship and when we are able to bring those things and just our junk, He creates healing around that. And so maybe that answers the why, right? Why do we want to know us? So He can heal us.
And a lot of times the attack is specifically centered against us bringing those things to Him, right? Like it could be the tiniest thing that feels like a huge thing, but it's only huge as long as we keep it in darkness. And so it's more, the attack is more about preventing the relationship, preventing that connection, rather than just the whatever it is, the sin or the weakness or the bondage or the hurt or the wound. Like, that's a big deal, but it's a way bigger deal if that can be held back in either in secret or in darkness or in just a private struggle versus getting it in the open where the King can heal it.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
What are you ruminating on, Shaw?
I'm still just loving. You said truth isn't a thing; it's a person, and then we've just been talking about relationship and kids, and I think Ken, something I was thinking about when you were talking about even when your kid's like far away and doing all the wrong things or whatever, like all you want to do is spend time around them and know them, and I think it goes the other side of it too. When they're doing everything right and being the best kids, like I still just want to be around them and like figure out like what the heck is in your head that like made you do that that thing, good or bad, And I've seen Harper do some things that, like, we did a lemonade stand not too long ago, and he suggested that we make it free instead of charged, like with no ill intention, and he made way more money off tips than he would have if he would have charged. But like, and he was like, "What happened?" But it was just like, just to see his heart, like, just say, "Hey, I want to do something nice for like our neighbors that are driving by today," and like how excited he got and things like that, and just like I can see Father like being like that with us. It's like, oh man, like, Ken and Andrew are doing this thing, and it's like, that's so cool. I want to be involved in that. I want to know like what they're thinking. Just talk to me. And yeah, when you step back, and I'm just hearing relationship, 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 and and yeah, truth is a person. Like, yeah, that got me good. That's some real goodies right there, because I think people get trapped in thinking it's something else, and two,
Mhm.
my relationship with Emily is different than anybody else's, and I think that's also an interesting thing, right? Is like, and I'm thinking back to your AB picture, Andrew, like I look at that, and it's interesting how all our relationships with Christ are a little different, and um, it's almost weird to think like anybody would have the exact same one or put the expectation on someone else. Like, and that, I mean, that could sprawl off into a whole nother deal because
Yeah.
there's lots of scenarios, but like it definitely struck a chord. Like,
Yeah. Well,
good.
there's an amazing thing jumped out at me as I was doing this study. Um, in Messiah's example, um, because we typically don't think so much of we don't necessarily think specifically about Messiah's relationship to the Father in general, right? I mean, we know they're close. We know in a way they're one, and in that mystery um, they're also a father and a son, and yet in John 8, in the context of the Pharisees basically challenging him and saying, "Are you saying you're greater than Abraham?" Which kind of harkens back to Genesis 18:19. But in that context of them challenging him and saying, "How could you be greater than Abraham?" His response to them is you know, you have not known Yahweh, you have not known the Father, but I know him. And if I say I do not know him, I shall be like you, a liar. But I do know him, and I guard his word. And so even Messiah has the same. There's that same almost. I don't want to call it criteria. That seems to kind of cheapen it, but there's that same necessity of Messiah knowing the Father. He says, "I know him," and that really fascinated me to think of it on the same thing that we're called to know him operates between him and the Father, which is an amazing thing. And he says, "I know him and I guard his word," and that's particularly fascinating because connecting that to 1 John 3:6, Ken, you were bringing up the connection between abiding, and 1 John 3:6 says, "Everyone abiding in him or staying in him does not sin. Everyone sinning has neither seen him nor known him." And so again, back to that connection of knowing him, and it's like we know we're going to stumble, but if we're intentionally living a life that's contrary to his nature, then we don't really know him. You know, if our kids decide that they're going to rebel and leave home early and do all the things that we tried to teach them not to do, like we don't really know them, right? Like we don't know who they are. That's not what we poured into them, and that's a fascinating thing. And then at the risk of kind of rambling a little bit here, the reason that's amazing, if you pay attention to those keywords, has neither seen him nor known him, and then also to guard his word from John 8. When you break down the Hebrew word yada, it's three Hebrew letters, yod, daled, and ayin. And those three letters are so cram-packed, but when you take each of them individually, yod is the hand, and it means action to do. And we've talked before in our podcast about how you don't believe something unless you do it, right? You don't believe a bridge can hold your weight unless you're walking across it. The Hebrew word for daled, the theme there is door, and we know Yahushua said, "I am the door." Like I'm the way, the truth, and life. And then in I think John 10, he said, "I am the door, I am the gate." And then that implies covenant, and that implies all the the access to the Father and everything else. And then the last word, ayin, means to see, literally. And so there's, Hebrews talks about faith is the substance of things not seen, and so there's this element of all those three themes coming together in the word to intimately know, yada, and it's all connected with, if someone is living in sin, they have not seen or known him. If Yahushua himself said, I've seen him, I know him, and I guard his words. In fact, he says, another place, no one has seen the Father at any time except the Son. So there's just a ton there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think probably getting pretty close on time, but some of the things that I just really love everything you were talking about with that Messiah models knowing what it looks like to know. And he models that with his relationship in the Father, and you give those examples, and we're called to be his disciples, so it doesn't surprise me, right, that he would model this very thing that he's calling us to do. And when you were talking, the only thing that I was kind of thinking of, and I don't want to get too far into it, but just right before Messiah goes back to heaven. So he's died, he's resurrected, and this is when, soon, we know that soon at Sukkot, or what's the other term for
trumpets or
no, it's
tabernacles?
Sukkot. No, what is Sukkot? What is
Tabernacles? In gathering?
no, when the Spirit comes. That's not Sukkot, that's
Oh no, Pentecost, Shavuot. Yeah.
Shavuot, yeah, Pentecost. Okay, so Pentecost. So the Spirit hasn't come yet, but so Messiah's died, resurrected. He's appeared to his disciples and to other people, and so far the Spirit's been kind of separate from us. Although people have had interactions with the Spirit throughout the Word, but it hasn't been abiding people consistently. And he says in John 16:7, he says, "But I say the truth to you, it is better that I go away, for if I do not go away, the Helper or the Comforter shall not come to you at all. But if I go, I shall send him to you." And we're just talking about to know, right? So Messiah had to go away so that so the Spirit could come to us, in us, so that we could know him. And then to me, that just like waterfalls down everything else we've been talking about, right? So to know him, then we'd have understanding, to have wisdom, to be able to abide in the Father. But it seems like there's this really cool moment in time where God's calling us to know the Spirit, and part of, to me, to have a physical relationship, you'd have to be in their presence. And so by Yeshua leaving and the Spirit coming, we have that opportunity now to know the Spirit.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a good place to wrap up, I think.
Okay, Sean, any concluding thoughts? Or we calling this a wrap?
Calling it a wrap. It's really, yeah. I got about 1 billion thoughts, but not enough time. So,
Okay.
cool.